I told my husband he was a failure, and he left, and I thought I'd won the argument until I realized I'd lost the only man who truly loved me. Now, one single mistake might cost me the life I never knew I wanted. I'm Sabana, 29 years old, and I've been married to James for 4 years. Well, I guess I should say was married to James. Looking back, maybe I pushed too hard. But honestly, when you're married to someone who barely shows ambition or drive, what are you supposed to do? I met James while finishing my MBA. He was already established in his career as an environmental engineer, and I thought I'd found someone stable, someone who matched my energy. But people change, don't they? Or maybe they just show their true colors. The breaking point wasn't a dramatic fight or scandal. It was more like death by 1,000 cuts. Every time I came home from my consulting job and found him perfectly content with his 9-to-5 routine, every time he turned down a promotion opportunity because he was satisfied with his current position, every time he chose to spend time in his garden instead of networking at industry events with me, it all added up. Last month, I landed a huge project at work, a career-defining one that caught the executive team's attention. I was working late nights, coordinating with international clients, and proving what I was capable of. And James, he would just ask if I wanted to watch some silly show with him or suggest we take a weekend trip to visit his parents. It was as if he couldn't read the room. I tried explaining to him how important this was for us. This could mean a path to partnership at the firm. I told him we could finally afford that house in Brighton Hills, and he just looked at me like I was speaking another language. "We're fine, Sav," he'd say. "Maybe we should focus on enjoying what we have." Enjoy what we have. We lived in a decent but completely average neighborhood, while my colleague Rachel had just moved into a lakefront property. Her husband? Now he had what it took. He'd changed jobs 3 times in the last 2 years, negotiating a better deal each time. Meanwhile, James was proud of his 10 years at the same company. Things came to a head 2 weeks ago. I had just finished a crucial presentation, and instead of being there to support me, James was at a community garden meeting. When he came home, still with dirt under his nails, I lost it. I let it all out, how his lack of ambition was holding us back and how embarrassing it was to have a husband who was content with mediocrity while everyone else was moving forward. "You're wasting your potential," I said. "Do you know how it looks that my husband would rather play in the dirt than advance in his career? I thought I married someone with drive, not someone who peaked in his 30s. He tried to argue that there was more to life than climbing the corporate ladder and that he was proud of his work-life balance. "Balance?" I snapped. "More like complacency." I couldn't stop. Everything I'd been holding back just poured out. "You're failing us," I said. "You're failing me. You're supposed to be my partner, but you're dead weight. A failed husband is someone who can't even match his wife's ambition. Thank God we don't have kids yet. You'd fail as a father too, teaching them that it's okay to be average." I expected him to snap back, to show some passion for something, but instead he stayed quiet. He went to his study and stayed there all night. The following days were tense. He went to work and came home without saying much. I thought he was processing everything I'd said, maybe finally realizing he needed to step up. Then yesterday, I came home late from work again. The house felt different, and at first I didn't know what it was. Then I noticed his laptop wasn't on the kitchen counter anymore. His keys weren't in the bowl by the entrance. When I went upstairs, the closet door was open, and half the hangers were empty. No note, no message, no email. He just left. I've called him 20 times since last night, straight to voicemail. His best friend won't tell me anything, only that James is safe. Safe? What about me? What about our life together? How dare he just leave instead of facing this head on? My mom says I should give him space, that men need time to process. Process what? The truth is, I'm the one who has been carrying this relationship while he's been content to drift. If anyone needs space to process, it's me. I keep looking at our wedding photos on the wall. We look so perfect, so full of promise. When did he decide it was okay to stop trying? When did he become so complacent? My phone buzzes again. It's probably Rachel checking in on me. She's been texting nonstop since I told her what happened. I should answer, but right now, I just need to figure out my next step. Because this isn't how our story is supposed to end. It's been 3 days since I last wrote, and everything has gotten even more complicated. James finally agreed to meet me at Riverside Park. Neutral ground, he called it, like we were opposing armies instead of husband and wife. I got there early, wearing the blue dress he always liked, prepared with every argument about why he was overreacting to what was just an honest conversation about our future. I saw him sitting on a bench near the water wearing that faded Stanford engineering sweatshirt he refuses to replace. He looked tired, somehow older, but he was clean-shaven and his hair was neatly trimmed. Part of me wanted to run to him, to hug him, and tell him to come home so we could forget all this. But another part of me remembered how he just left, how he walked away from our marriage instead of stepping up. "You look good," he said when I sat down, like we were acquaintances running into each other at Whole Foods. I waited for him to say more, to apologize for disappearing, but he just stared at the ducks. Finally, I couldn't take the silence anymore. "So that's it? You're not even going to explain why you left?" He turned to look at me and his eyes were different, distant, like he was looking at a stranger. "I think you explained it pretty clearly," he said. "I'm a failure, dead weight, unfit to be your husband or a potential father." I was upset, I said. "You know how intense things get during big projects. I just needed you to understand how important this is for our future." "Our future," he repeated slowly. "I've been thinking a lot about that, about what you said about my career choices and ambition." He shifted on the bench, turning to face me directly. "Have you ever stopped to consider that maybe I'm exactly where I want to be?" That familiar frustration bubbled up again. "How can you say that? You could be earning twice what you're making now." "If you'll let me finish," he interrupted, his voice firm but not angry. "I've spent the last 10 years developing sustainable water treatment systems. My work has helped bring clean drinking water to communities that desperately need it. Last month, our project in Honduras got approved for expansion. It's not flashy. I don't get invited to charity galas for it, but it matters." "I'm not saying your work doesn't matter," I tried to explain, "but you could be doing so much more, leading bigger projects, managing bigger teams." "That's the point, Savannah. I don't want to manage bigger teams. I don't want to spend my days in strategy meetings or reviewing budgets. I want to be on the ground, doing the actual work. And yes, I love my community garden because it keeps me connected to the world beyond spreadsheets and PowerPoint presentations." "But we could have so much more," I insisted. "That house in Brighton Hills?" "We don't need a house in Brighton Hills," he said, raising his voice just enough for a nearby jogger to glance our way. Then he lowered it again. "Our house is perfectly fine. It's close to our jobs. We have good neighbors, and it's more than enough space for 2 people." "So you're just going to give up on us? On everything we planned?" He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Plans keep changing, Sav. When we got married, we talked about starting a family by now. Instead, every time I bring it up, you have a new goal to reach first, a new promotion, a new house to save for. When will it be enough?" "Oh, so this is my fault for having ambition, for wanting us to reach our full potential?" "There it is again," he said. "Our potential. You use that word, but you only mean your version of it. Your definition of success." He pulled out his phone and showed me a photo of himself with a group of kids, all wearing gardening gloves and beaming with joy. These kids from the community center had never seen a tomato plant until we started the garden program. Now they're growing their own food, learning about sustainability. That's success to me. That's potential. It felt like we were speaking different languages. "That's very sweet, James. Truly. But we can't build a future on good moments and tomato plants." "Actually, we can," he said. "I earn enough to live, 6 figures, doing work I believe in. We have a beautiful house, no debt other than the mortgage, and a solid retirement fund. But none of that matters to you because Rachel's husband just bought a house by the lake, right?" I flinched. "That's not fair." "No, what's not fair is having a partner who measures your worth by your LinkedIn profile." He stood, shoving his hands into his pockets. "I love you, Savannah. I've loved you since the day I met you, but I don't recognize you anymore. The woman I married was ambitious, yes, but she also had compassion. She understood that success isn't just about money and status." "The woman you married grew up," I shot back. "She realized that in the real world, you have to keep moving forward or you get left behind." "Left behind by who? Your colleagues? The neighbors? Since when do their opinions matter more than your own happiness, than ours?" I stood too, my voice trembling with anger and hurt. "So now you're throwing our marriage away just because I want more for us?" "No," he said quietly. "I'm walking away because you don't see that what we already have is enough. Because you'd rather tear me down than accept that my dreams are different from yours." He started to walk away, but then turned back. "Do you know what the irony is? I've never been more proud of anyone than I am of you. Your drive, your intelligence, your ability to achieve, it's incredible. I just wish you could be proud of me too." "James, wait." But he was already leaving me alone with the ducks and this hollow ache in my chest that felt worse than the first time he left. I sank onto the bench, my carefully applied makeup smearing with my tears. My phone buzzed, Rachel asking if I wanted to come over for wine and a girls' night. I ignored it. All I could think about was James's face when he showed me that picture of the kids in the garden. When was the last time I saw him so excited about something? When was the last time I even asked him? No, I won't let him turn this around on me. I'm not the one who left. I'm not the one settling for just existing. Isn't there more to life than this? Isn't there more than being content with enough? Another week has passed and I really screwed up. The kind of mistake that makes all our previous problems seem like nothing. I can barely write this without feeling nauseous, but I need to get it out somewhere. After that disaster at the park, I buried myself even deeper in work, staying at the office until midnight, taking early calls with international clients, anything to avoid the empty house. Rachel finally convinced me to shake off my slump and join her and some coworkers for happy hour last Friday. I didn't even want to go, but the thought of another night alone with my thoughts was worse. We went to that new rooftop bar downtown, the one James always said tried too hard to be sophisticated. I guess he was right about that too. Everything there screamed, "Look how successful we are," from the gold-rimmed glasses to the panoramic city views. Rachel ordered round after round of expensive champagne, insisting I needed to remember my worth. "You know what your problem is?" she said after her third glass. "You got married too young. You hadn't even discovered your real potential." I remember feeling angry at that. I'm not the one with the problem. James is the one who... The one who what? Has principles? Come on. The man literally helps bring clean water to poor communities. He's like a walking NGO commercial, she said, rolling her eyes. But that doesn't pay for designer bags or vacation homes. There was something about the way she said it that made me uncomfortable. It sounded so shallow. But then she introduced me to her friend Blake, an investment fund manager in town for a conference. He was everything James wasn't. Impeccably dressed, wearing a luxury watch, already planning his next big investment. The champagne kept flowing and I kept diving deeper into conversation with him. I knew where it was all headed. I knew the moment Blake offered to share an Uber back to his hotel since it was on the way to my place. I knew when I didn't correct him. The whole time, a voice in my head screamed at me to stop, but another whispered that maybe this was what I needed, someone who understood ambition, who wouldn't make me feel bad for wanting more. I woke up in his hotel room at 4 a.m., my head pounding, my stomach churning. Blake's Rolex was still ticking on the nightstand, each tick booming like it was inside my skull. I dressed in the dark and called my own Uber, feeling like the worst cliche in the world. The worst. In those few minutes waiting for my ride, Blake stirred in bed and mumbled something about getting breakfast, like this was normal. Like I was just another ambitious woman out for a good time. I almost threw up right there. The shame hit me in waves on the way home, not just about Blake, though that was more than enough, but about everything. I thought about James showing me the photo of the kids in his garden program, about how his face lit up. When was the last time I felt that kind of pure joy about anything? Even my big project at work, the one I'd been killing myself over, suddenly felt hollow. I've been ignoring James's calls and messages since then. He's been trying to schedule another meeting to talk. He thinks we can fix this if we're both willing to really listen to each other. How am I supposed to look him in the eyes now? How do I sit across from him and face those honest eyes, knowing what I've done? Yesterday, I drove past his office around lunchtime. I saw him walking out with some coworkers laughing at something. He looked okay. Not great, but okay. He was wearing that old Stanford sweatshirt again, and for the first time, it didn't irritate me. Instead, I remembered how it smelled of his soap and garden dirt, how I used to steal it on cold mornings. Rachel keeps texting me, telling me to live my truth and not feel bad for exploring my options. She doesn't understand. This isn't about exploring options, it's about how I destroyed something real because I couldn't see what I had right in front of me. But even now, feeling so guilty and disgusted with myself, there's still a part of me that thinks I wasn't entirely wrong. Yes, I handled it in the worst way possible. Yes, what I did with Blake was unforgivable. But is it really so wrong to want more in life? To not settle for just enough when you could have it all? James texted me again this morning. He wants to meet this weekend. He says he's been thinking a lot about our future and has some ideas about how we could bridge our differences. My heart nearly stopped when I read it. He's trying so hard to fix this, and here I am, holding on to a secret that would ruin any chance of reconciliation. I should tell him. I know I should. But every time I think about it, every time I imagine the look in his eyes when he finds out what I did, I can't breathe. So I sit in our house, no, my house, I guess, surrounded by all these things I once thought were so important. The designer furniture James said we didn't need, the enormous TV I insisted on, the framed magazine article about my company's success. None of it feels like enough anymore. But maybe that's been the problem all along. Nothing ever felt like enough. And now I might have broken the one thing that was. The meeting I had been dreading finally happened yesterday. James suggested we meet at our house. Not my house, our house, he emphasized. I spent the whole morning trying to make everything perfect, as if the right coffee and his favorite snacks could somehow make up for what I'd done. He arrived on time, as always. That was his hallmark, reliability, the same quality I used to criticize as boring. But he looked different, more resolute somehow. His hair was freshly cut, and he was wearing a new blue shirt instead of his usual casual clothes. My stomach dropped as I realized this wasn't going to be the reconciliation I'd hoped for. "I've been going to therapy," he said as soon as we sat down in the living room. Straight to the point, no small talk. "It's helped me understand a few things. About us, about myself, about why I've felt so diminished in our marriage." I opened my mouth to respond, but he raised his hand. "Please, let me finish. I need to say this." He took a deep breath. "I love what I do, Sabana. I love that my work genuinely improves people's lives. I love my community garden program. And yes, I love being able to leave work at 5 p.m. and have time to live my life. That's not a lack of ambition, it's choosing a different kind of success." "I know," I said quietly. "I've been thinking about that too." "Oh, really?" he asked, leaning forward, his gaze intense. "Because here's what I think. I think you're so afraid of not being extraordinary that you've forgotten how to be happy. Everything has to be bigger, better, more impressive. But when is it enough, Sav? When are you going to stop and enjoy what you've built?" The guilt was suffocating me. I had to tell him. "James, there's something I saw you," he interrupted. 4 simple words that brought my world to a screeching halt. "Last Friday, I went downtown to pick up some food and saw you getting into that Uber. I saw who you were with." The room started spinning. "James, it wasn't..." My voice cracked. "Just no." "You know what's ironic?" he said, his voice shaking. "I came that night to surprise you. I had this whole speech prepared about how we could find a compromise. Maybe I could take on more responsibilities at work, and you could slow down a bit. Find a balance. I even bought your favorite gelato." He laughed, but it sounded hollow. "I waited for hours. I called hospitals when you didn't come home, convinced something terrible had happened to you." I was crying now, a messy, uncontrollable sobbing. "It didn't mean anything. I was drunk and upset." "And what?" he snapped. "Were you looking for someone more ambitious?" The bitterness in his voice hit like a slap.
"Do you know what real ambition is, Savannah?" he said. "It's working on something you believe in, even if it's not glamorous. It's being kind when it's easier to be cruel.
Building a marriage on trust and respect, not competition and status." "I know I messed up," I whispered. "We can fix this. Go to therapy. Take some time." "No." He stood, and I noticed he wasn't wearing his wedding ring. "We can't fix it because you still don't get it. You're not sorry for what you did. You're sorry you got caught. You're sorry because this makes you look bad. Even now, you're probably more worried about what people will say when they find out." He wasn't entirely wrong. A part of me already dreaded the gossip, the judgment, Rachel's fake sympathy, the whispers at the office. "I filed for divorce last week," he said quietly. "You'll get the papers tomorrow. I'm not doing this to punish you. I'm doing this because we want fundamentally different things, and neither of us should have to change who we are to make this work."
"But I love you," I murmured, hating how weak my voice sounded.
"Maybe you do," he replied, "but you love your idea of success more." He headed for the door, then turned back to me. "You know what's the saddest part? You're already successful. You have a great career, a beautiful house, respect in your field, but you'll never see it because you're too busy looking at what everyone else has." Then he left, and I knew this time it was final. I sat there for hours, surrounded by the expensive things I insisted we needed. The designer lamp that cost more than the entire budget for his community garden, the smart home system he said we didn't need, the framed achievements on the walls. My phone kept buzzing, probably Rachel, wanting to know how it went. I turned it off. For the first time in years, I sat in silence, really looking at my life. I thought about James's face when he talked about his water treatment projects, those kids in his garden, all the times he tried to share his joy with me. And I dismissed it, calling it complacency. The divorce papers arrived this morning. James was meticulous. He isn't asking for anything except his personal belongings and his gardening tools. He even left me the house I bragged so much about, but sitting here now, it feels less like a victory and more like a monument to everything I did wrong. I can't stop thinking about what he said about being extraordinary versus being happy. When did I decide those couldn't be the same thing? When did I start measuring success by other people's standards instead of my own? I don't know what's going to happen now. My big project at work doesn't feel so important anymore. Rachel's calls go straight to voicemail. The house feels too big, too empty, too much. Maybe James was right. Maybe I never learned how to be satisfied with enough, but I'm starting to believe it's something I need to learn. Not for him, it's too late for that, but for myself. Because all this ambition, all these cravings for more, have left me with a pile of expensive things and absolutely no one to share them with. I told him he was a failure as a husband and father. Turns out the failure was mine, and I failed as a wife, failed to be honest, failed to see what really mattered. And now I'm left picking up the pieces of the life I broke all on my own.